morning. Hi. We're waiting for this. I'm Kathy Chambliss, and Tim and I are hosting the Summer Forum this year. Welcome to our fourth in the series of Summer Forum at First Unitarian Church. We're very pleased to have Dr. Cami Collette as our speaker. Before I introduce her, however, we're going to have a musical interlude, and we'll get started on that. We want to thank Dr. Lou Borgnicht for his beautiful rendition. Let's give him another round of applause. Thank you. We'll get to hear him again in the offering. So before I introduce our speaker this morning, I want to remind you of a few announcements. If you decide to leave before the presentation is over, please use the rear doors. We like to keep this closed because of our recording system. We're recording the session. And also, if you're in the balcony and you would like to ask a question during our Q&A period, please come down to the back of the chapel because you'll need to use the microphone. And Tim and I will be passing the mic to people who wish to ask a question. And just a reminder that when you stand up to ask a question, please end with a question mark. We like proper punctuation in the Unitarian Church. So I think that's all of our announcements. And I'm really pleased to welcome our speaker today, Dr. Cami Collette. Cami first came to Utah in 1975 to attend Westminster College from Colorado. And she stayed. She attended the University of Utah Medical School. And after that, she completed a residency in family medicine at Holy Cross Hospital. Right now, Cami has for many years been training physicians at the residency program at St. Mark's Hospital, which she started in 1986. In 1980, Cami joined this church as well as the Unitarian Church Choir, where she has been a member ever since. Cami went back to school a couple years ago, to Westminster to get her master's in public health. She completed it in May of 2018, and since that time, she has been working tirelessly to try to educate people about advanced directives or planning for their care in their lifetime so they can get the care that they want and deserve at the end of their life. And so she is going to speak to us today. We are going to do a little different today because instead of going as long as there are questions on the Q&A, we're going to have a presentation and then hear from Lou again with some music, then have questions and answers. But we were going to end this session in here at 11 o'clock and continue in Elliott Hall, where Cami will have materials and forms and an opportunity to talk to you more in one-on-one or small groups. So we will end promptly at 11. So the title of Cami's presentation is Prepare for Your Care, and you'll have to finish it.
All right, thanks.
Okay. Thank you.
It's a rare opportunity that I get to come up at the God box and actually talk. I think Lou's rendition of "Nobody Knows the Troubles I've Seen." You know, we've all seen troubles. We've lost loved ones. We've had to maybe battle with illness ourselves. So, how do we prepare for our own care, or maybe even the care for our loved ones? And so that's why I've titled the talk this, but I've based it on Atul Gawande's Being Mortal book. How do we start this conversation about being mortal? You know, in today's America, do Americans agree on anything? Well, I can tell you there's one thing. Americans, 94% of Americans agree and think that it's very important to talk to their loved ones about their wishes regarding their end of life. So this right, left, blue, you know, red, purple, everyone feels this is very important. In reality, only 27% have actually had this conversation with their family. It's a very hard conversation to have. About 48% of Americans feel, oh, they could do it. They really are looking forward to having that conversation. So there you go, about half are willing. Then there's this 41% that says, that's really going to be difficult, but I'm willing to go there. And there's about 11% that says, no way, we are not talking about this. And it's really, you cannot, just like some people, you can't change their mind. They are not going to talk about it. So you can't force this subject. This is a very difficult subject. And if you think, you know, we don't have our head stuck in the sand as people, doctors have their head stuck in the sand as well. They don't like having this conversation. So we want to make the conversation, it's kind of an ongoing thing, how you do it. It's not one and done. You do it at holiday times. You do it, you know, at different times. Maybe when someone does get ill, or when you're attending a funeral. It's never easy. But if at the ICU bed, it's very hard, especially when the loved one hasn't told you what they wanted, and they're not able to talk and not able to tell you. And they can change over time. What you think you want when you're 20 is going to be so different when you're 80. And so these are things. If you were going to die, oh wait, it's not an if. You know, nobody gets out of this alive. We all are going to face this. 70% of the US population, they actually say, I want to die at home, okay? 70% actually die in the hospital or nursing homes or some sort of facility. So, and I told you, doctors are really not comfortable having this conversation. My master's thesis at Westminster were what are the barriers to advanced care planning in a hospital setting? I mean, the first thing we ask when anybody gets a mammogram, an x-ray, or they go for the hospital, anything, is, do you have a living will? Now, the answer may be no. The next question they seem to ask is, and what's your insurance? Like, okay, isn't there something you could help with? But hospitals don't make money if you choose to not have care. They make money, unfortunately, in the American healthcare system, to do what's right for the bottom line and the capital. You know, they need to make money. And I remember discussing with the CEO, trying to figure out why would I want to do this research. I had to say, well, are you getting dinged with Medicare for any problems? And it's when someone comes in and they come into the hospital and then they die, and they were listed as full code, but they probably should have been, they did not want to have CPR. And then you figure that out somewhere in the hospital, and then they may die in the hospital. It's a bad mark on the hospital that they died, which is kind of a crazy thing. I think if you're going to give the best care, you shouldn't be marked down for doing what the patient and honoring their wishes. But you know, there's a California survey in 2012 that said, have you even talked to your physician? And only 7% had the conversation with their physician about their end-of-life care, or who would speak with them if they were unconscious, or what would happen. So It's very difficult because people don't quite get what's a living will, what's an advance directive, and so they put it off. So in reality, there's only about 34% of U.S. adults, so 18 and over, who actually have a living will. And I want you all just to think out there. I'm not going to embarrass anybody right now, but do you have a living will? Is it in a place where you have access? Is it in a safe deposit box that at 2 a.m. in the morning you're not going to be able to access it? Do your family members know what it says? And does your doctor have a copy? Is there an electronic version available? So at 2 a.m., does the hospital, the local hospital that you might end up in, have it? If you go to Arizona for the winter, do you have the Arizona living will? Every state requires a different document. Some require notarization. The state of Utah merely requires a witness. So at the end, I do have copies of living wills for those who don't have a copy. We can actually fill it out, and any one of you can witness it as long as you are not a relative of the person or their doctor, or we'll go into that. So I told you only 34% have living wills. Now there is one town in the United States where everybody talks about death. And that's La Crosse, Wisconsin. They've got 96% of their adult population in La Crosse with living wills. Now, how do they do that? Well, they had one champion, a PhD psychologist, who felt that it was important, and he was helping at one hospital system. Now, La Crosse is a unique system. There's only 2 hospitals, very different than Salt Lake. We have several different hospitals, lots of different hospital systems. And La Crosse is mostly white American and middle class, so it's an easy population to talk to. They aren't concerned if there are a few minorities, and the cultural diversity isn't quite as challenging, because all that makes end-of-life discussions very difficult for anyone, because you don't know, and you want to be culturally sensitive. So they developed a system called Respecting Choices, and they have trained people from all over the United States. How do you have this conversation? How do you bring up the topic and respect the choices that they make? And so that's how La Crosse, Wisconsin. And there's a good podcast on the town where everybody talks about death that NPR has, if you're interested. So the important questions that you want to ask is, who would you want to have speak for yourself if you were unable, if something had happened to you? And this is for anyone 18 or over, and this is the hard thing. People graduate from high school, and they don't think about that. But in La Crosse, Wisconsin, it's included. They say, oh, you're graduating, you're going to go off to college, here you go. Who's going to talk to you? Let's make sure it's on file. But who would you trust? Who would make the decisions you want? And you need to understand, you've got to tell them, what are your goals? You know, when you have a new diagnosis of a cancer or a thing, people want to be cured. People don't want to die. They would like to live. And so they're willing to put up with quite a bit in order to continue some quality of life. But everyone has a line in the sand where they don't want to cross, where that, I'm not too sure if I'd want to be living on a ventilator with a feeding tube, not being able to communicate with my family members. But Stephen Hawkins, he had ALS, he lived that way for years and did incredible research and had a meaningful life. So you have to sort out what is important for you. What makes life worth living? And there's some things that are worse than death. And that's where you have to talk to your family members, and it's hard, because what one family member thinks is worse than death, another said, oh, well, that's not a big deal. I could live with that. So it's very individual. So healthcare proxies, what are they? It's someone who's over 18. You can't have your 14-year-old son, even though, gosh, or your 14-year-old daughter. You have to have someone who's a legal age. And they are the ones that are going to be willing and able to talk to the physician about your care when you are unable to. So that is what the healthcare proxy means. If they don't understand your wishes, they're going to do their wishes. And I will tell you right now, children want their parents to live forever. You will get the feeding tube. You'll get a ventilator. They cannot pull the plug on mom or grandma. It is very hard. So if you haven't had this conversation, to tell them, I would not want to live like this. And then sometimes to reverse it. How would you feel if it were you in the bed, if it were you having this problem? So there are certain people who can't be your healthcare proxy. Your physician, your nurse in the hospital, or if you're in a care facility, the people that are involved in the care facility. Anybody who is like, they don't have to be related by blood. You can have friends, not just family members. But if you want someone who's not related by blood, you really better get the living will and to designate it. If you are not legally married to your loved one, but you've been living together as husband, wife, husband, whatever, if you're not a legal marriage, it's not honored. You need to have a marriage. This is one of the things, especially in the state of Utah. So that's why you need to designate. I have lots of people who, I have one couple I've been taking care of for years, and I helped her fill out it. And she says, yeah, I didn't want my husband because we've been divorced for 20 years. And I said, wait a minute, you're still living with him, and I thought you guys were still married. No, they got divorced, but then she came back because she thought it important to raise the kids together, but she didn't want to remarry the guy. And I had no clue. And they have grandkids, and I don't even think the grandkids know that their grandparents aren't legally married. But she chose her children to make decisions for her. So you do need to choose someone, and there is a legal way to do that. And if you haven't talked with them about what is important, is time. Do you want to live as long as possible? Keep me alive on those tubes, get that dialysis, do everything possible? Or is the quality of life more important? And what does that mean to have a quality life? So you may become that some person's healthcare proxy. It may be your loved one, and so you need to know what they want. If you don't have this, in the state of Utah, there's an order. First, it's your spouse. So if you are legally married, but you're separated and really don't want that person to make any decisions, guess what? They're going to be making the decisions because they are your legal spouse. It would be your first adult and oldest child. You may not want the first adult or oldest child to be making those decisions. Then it's your parent, if they're still alive. And then it would go to your siblings, oldest sibling down to the youngest. And that's the way it is in the state of Utah without a legal. And then if you've got a living grandparent, they can actually make a decision. So these are important things, and you do need to reevaluate it. So there are the 5 Ds of advanced directives and why you want to change what you've had in your advanced directive. You should review it every decade. If there's a death, if your loved one, your spouse has died, and they were listed, and now you list one's child, you don't have a backup. It's nice to have 2 people that the medical professionals can talk to legally. If there's a divorce, if you get a new diagnosis like cancer, a new terminal illness, or you have a sudden decline in health. And I've added a 6D, and that's if you live in a different state for part of the year, or you've moved from a different state. Say your parents have just moved here from South Dakota, and you're going to be taking care of them. Well, they may not have, you've got to get the Utah papers. The South Dakota papers may not be legal. So when people say, I'm DNR, what does that really mean? Do not resuscitate. That means CPR or cardiopulmonary resuscitation. You don't want it. And we look at TV and we see all these people getting CPR on those TV shows, and 77% survive on TV. It's amazing. So everybody thinks, oh, CPR. And I mean, doctors even say, so if your heart should stop, do you want us to restart it? Like we can. We are not good at restarting hearts of people who have illnesses. There is a study of people 65 and older in the hospital. There is medical professionals right there. They have a cardiac arrest. They are not breathing, and a code blue or code red, it's a code. And their heart is not beating, they are not breathing, and the team rushes in. They're all there. This isn't out like at the beach. This isn't out on the golf course. The team responds. 83% die. They don't make it. That's the reality. Not 77% live like on TV. See, 17% that actually do survive that, half of them, they are in a facility and are gone within the next year. So they have died within the year after their cardiac arrest in the hospital. The other half that survived, they're not like playing tennis like they do on TV. Some of them are in facilities, but they're living. And the quality of life has deteriorated, and it may not be, but they're alive. And they haven't died. And we don't go in around shooting people these days to end their life. We don't have a end of life choice in this state. We allow people to die of natural causes, which sometimes can be incredibly painful. And this is why hospice options and palliative care, and I'll go into that a little bit, what does that mean and what you can ask for in this state. Otherwise, move to Vermont and Oregon, get established as, you have to have 2 doctors that say it. It's a pretty a rigorous thing to be able to have the right to die and end your life if you have a terminal illness. So, when doctors are asking you this is how I prefer. If your heart should stop and you're not breathing, what would you want me to do at that point? I mean, and most of my older patients say, oh my gosh, if I'm already dead, leave me be. People aren't actually afraid of death. They're afraid of dying. They're afraid of what is come. All that time that leads up when you're not dead and what you experience. So we know that CPR in reality is not very successful, but we can have machines keep you alive. We got feeding tubes to keep you alive, dialysis. We can do more surgeries. And just because we doctors can do something doesn't mean we always should. We can make things worse. We can torture people to death at the end of their lives, and this is unfortunately what our American healthcare system does because we make a lot of money doing it. Lots of repeat hospitalizations, infections, pneumonias, urinary tract infections. Pneumonia used to be called the old man's friend because it took their lives. Back in the 1900s, people didn't live past 50. You know, women didn't have to experience menopause. They died in childbirth. People died of infections. We died of natural causes, and doctors and hospitals couldn't do much. In fact, hospitals were the place where people went to die, so they didn't want to go there. Everyone usually died at home, and they tried to avoid the hospital. So you can choose to have all these life-sustaining treatments, and if they're going to give you the quality of life and the meaning of a life that you want, then go for that. But if you are choosing and looking more that I really want to spend more quality time, I want to be more comfortable, and to recover from a major surgery, do I really need this surgery? Can I live without it? These are questions that you should ask, because you're the one that ultimately says yes or no, and you do not have to accept every single thing a doctor recommends. My mother's cousin at 78 was told, if you don't have this cardiac bypass, you'll be dead within the year. And she just looked at the doc and said, well, then that's a risk I'll have to take, but I am not. Dude, you're not cutting into my chest. At 96, she died of a stroke. So there is another form that I am not going to be filling out with anyone, but I want you to be aware of, and that is what's called a pulsed form, or a provider order of life-sustaining treatment. This is a one-page form you fill out with your physician, or your nurse practitioner, or your physician assistant, a medical provider in the state of Utah who is caring for you, who understands your illnesses, and can discuss these questions. Do you want CPR? If your heart is stopped and you're not breathing, so you have died, you can say, no, I don't ever want that. You can say, if you can't eat, would you want a feeding tube? Maybe a trial of one, you can say, or you can make all sorts of decisions on this one-page form. And I'm actually on a state committee to try to get that form electronically available to the emergency medical people. Because when the 96-year-old collapses on hole 3 at the golf course, and they're called, that man's going to get CPR and taken to the hospital because they don't honor living wills. Even if you had the living will there, that's not a medical order. This is a piece of paper where your doctor has signed it, dated it, you've signed it, and you can do that piece of paper with your healthcare proxy. If that person already has dementia, if that person's unable to speak, you can fill out a pulse form with that designated healthcare proxy. If you have dementia, if you're already ill and you can no longer make your decisions, you can no longer make a living will. Living wills have to be filled out by the people who it's for. You cannot have someone else fill out your living will. So it's important to understand the difference between pulse forms and the living will. I'm also on a national committee to try to get the pulse form as one universal United States. It probably won't happen in the next decade or two, but it's a worthwhile goal because every state has a different form. In Colorado, where my mother lived, she had a MOST form, a medical order of life-sustaining treatment. And in her little box at the end of every form, and it's very similar to the Utah form, but it's still different, it said, will she allow any family member to change these wishes? And she looked at me after she'd had a small stroke and she said, now, honey, I love you, and I know you're a doctor, but I don't want you ever to be able to change this. I don't want these things. And she marked the box, no, I want these followed to the key. I want this. And they might not, and then we were not allowed to change it because it was a medical order signed by her medical provider. I do fill out these forms with patients who I look and I say, you know, they could die in the next year or two. It's important to have that conversation with them before the trauma, before the ICU bed. So that's what a pulse form. Paramedics can honor this. Physicians are a little hesitant to fill this out, but we can. It's usually done by primary care providers. I'll tell you, surgeons, they don't want anybody to have this form because they want to do everything, and they want you full code when you go into the OR because they don't want you dying on their operating room. So in a little handout that some of you might have gotten, it does have the difference between advanced directives and a pulse form. Just to touch on hospice, some people think hospice is death. Some people have had wonderful experiences with hospice, but it's basically how to care for not only the person with the terminal illness, but the family. Hospice will even check on the family a year after that person is gone. So hospice is wonderful. But what the American people usually experience is, oh, Barbara Bush goes on comfort care hospice, next day, Barbara Bush is dead. Whoa, what happened there? Hospice is best done if you are able to be on it for several months. My mother was able to be on it for a couple months. She was a hospice nurse for 20 years. She knew exactly what she wanted, and she couldn't wait to get on hospice. But you have to, in the United States, they make a rule. Physicians have to say, you have less than 6 months to live. So I looked at the medical provider of my mom in March of 2018, and I said, is it time for hospice? This is her 91st birthday. And she'd had the stroke when she was 89. And she said, no, your mom seems to be doing pretty good. And I said, okay, but she really doesn't want to go back to the hospital no matter what. And then in April, she got a pneumonia and a urinary tract infection and almost died. We did give her an antibiotic orally, but she kept her in her place where she was staying in Colorado. At that point, we transitioned her to hospice in April. On June 15th, my mom peacefully passed in her own bed with as her wishes is what she wanted. And it was on the Father's Day weekend right before that, the Friday. And so there was family member that had come in. Everybody got to be with her. It was quite amazing. And then the next weekend, we held the service. So if people can express the wishes, it takes a lot of stress off a family. So don't fear hospice. Palliative care is what is done when some people still want some surgeries, they want to have more done. It's to help you with understanding this won't save your life, this won't cure you, but it will make you a little more comfortable for longer. You might live a year, you might not, but that's palliative care, which is a brand new specialty in this care. So I've also listed some websites. For those of you who haven't got a living will and don't want to fill it out today, leaving-well.org has the Utah State Directive on it. It also has the Pulse form. So I've got put that link. There is Prepare for Your Care, which is a national website. The leaving-well.org is a Utah State website that has resources. Prepare for Your Care has little video vignettes of how to have that conversation with your family members, how to have that conversation with your doctor. And then there's the conversationproject.org. This is wonderful. It's got all sorts of handouts. How do you choose a healthcare proxy? How do you deal with it when you have someone with dementia? And then the National Pulsed, POLST.org, that has a map of the entire United States and can give you information about what is the pulse form for every single state. There are 3 books I'm going to recommend for reading: Being Mortal, Medicine, and What Matters in the End. And that's by Atul Gawande. That book I read 5 times as my brother got lymphoma and was in the hospital for 5 solid months. He wanted everything done. He got the feeding tube, he got the tube, he got the breathing, the tracheotomy, he got the dialysis. And on a Friday night, after being transferred from one ICU to another a month earlier and being told the cancer had still spread, he was offered, experimental chemo, and that failed. And so on a Friday night, at the end of April, after my brother was admitted in December of 2015, his wife was told, "There's nothing more we can do," which I think is the worst thing any physician can ever say. There's always something more we can do. We can care, we can do comfort. But she called me in a panic, and I flew out there, and it touched my soul. And I think that's what motivated me to go back and get my master's degree. There's another book called When Breath Becomes Air. And it's written by Dr. Paul Collette, who got a brain tumor, and he was a neurosurgery resident at the time, a young doctor in his career. And he talks about that. And it was written with Abraham Verghese. Then the last one, and the favorite, I love the title, Everything Happens for a Reason, and Other Lies I've Loved. And this is by Kate Bowler, who is an incredible person who got diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer in her 30s. And yet she had a young son and a young husband. And she was a religious professor, originally from Canada, but it's a good book. And the people that would come up to her husband and say, everything happens for a reason. And her husband would say, "Oh, good, I'd like to know what it is. Why would God want my child to be raised without his mother and me to be without my wife? Because if you've got an insight into this one, I want to know." And the neighbors would just say, "Here's the casserole," and walk away. So those are the books. At the end of the handout, if you haven't got it, there is a great little video called A Soul Doctor and a Jazz Singer. And as you get home, put this on this. It's a YouTube video. It is touching. You should see it. It touched my soul. And that's the end of my talk. We'll be taking questions. Thank you very much.
It's actually an amazing grace to give money to the church.
Thank you very much, Lou. I just want to remind everyone that I noticed people starting to even take notes. Cami has a lot of handouts, and maybe enough for everybody. If not, we can get you the web address where you can print out the forms. But we're recording these sessions, and they're available on the church website. So anybody who wants to go and listen to what Cami had to say again, or to suggest that a friend or neighbor listen to it, you could just go on to the Unitarian Church website and look for the videos of the church services of the summer forums.
All right, thank
for
you.
it.
So I do have copies of the Utah Living Will. If you have one, or if you just want to do it at home, don't take this copy. I've only got 50 copies. But if you, I'll just put it in the hands and you can hand it back. But and we will run out, I'm sure, because I only have 50 copies. People were asking if I'm going to hand out the Pulse form. I'm not, but this one you get from your physician. They should know about it. Any primary care physician should. But if you want to print it out, you can go to the leaving-well.org website and just print it out at home and take it to your physician. The actual page form that's going around is only 4 pages. It's actually a 14-page document that you print out on the leaving-well.org. I just printed out the last 4 pages that has your name, who are your proxies, and then what kinds of decisions and things you want. And then the very last page is where you sign it in front of a witness, and we can do that in Elliott Hall at coffee hour if anybody wants to. So, questions?
And we're going to come.
So her question is the Pulsed website. It is POLST.org. And that has the map. But for Utah, I do like the leaving-well.org. It has more than just the advanced directive, more than just the Pulsed. It has resources and other things that you click. And I love that website. So thank you for the question. I think we've got mics, so if you hold your hands up, they'll be going around.
For people that don't have healthy friends and family, do you recommend professional guardian and fiduciary services?
So that's a good question. If you have no friends and no family, you will get actually a guardian. It tends to happen. We have homeless people. We have people that end up in the hospital, and there is no one to make decisions for them. They don't even have a friend. They don't have anybody. And a court appoints a guardian. If you know who you'd want as a guardian, and you want to do that ahead of time, you can meet with a lawyer and do the guardianship. But the living will actually includes that. If you say in it, on the 4 pages, it says, on the one backside, would you want this person to be your guardian, one of these 2 people? Would you want the court to appoint this person? You mark that, and then you have a witness, and you've actually designated those people you've chosen. So you'd want to make sure who can make those decisions. It's hard because things change, people move, and some people are totally isolated without a single friend. And I am in the hospital rounding on my patients, and I go in and I see a patient every day, and there is no one. No one, no flowers, no one knows they're there. And when we discharge them, sometimes we're discharging them back to the homeless shelter. So if you have family and friends, consider yourself very lucky. There are many people in this world that has no one. So I hope that answered your question.
I noticed that the books are not listed on your handout, so do you have another handout inside Elliott Hall that has the books?
Yes, I apologize for that. I wanted to keep the handout as a 1-pager, and the books were it's so long. So I can give that information, but I'll mention them again. It's When Breath Becomes Air, Being Mortal, and the public libraries have all these books. If you Google the names, you don't need the authors, but Kate Bowler's book, Everything Happens for a Reason, and Other Lies I've Loved. So those titles maybe can stick with you enough that's, next question.
Hi, how important is geographic proximity of your medical decision maker?
Very good question. So I think that they need to be available at least by phone. You can talk to people over the phone. I was my brother's number two. His wife was the first medical decision maker. I was the second to help with him. And I called that hospital every day, and I was always talking. But I honored my brother's wishes, and he wanted everything. And my mother in Colorado kept saying, he needs to be on hospice. Get that. He's got to be on hospice. I said, Mom, they don't think he's dying. And she said, well, where are they going to bury him? I said, Mom, they don't think he's going to die. So I was my brother's, and I live here in Utah. I was my mother's second. My older brother, who lived in Colorado, was my mother's first. But he always deferred to me because I'm the doctor. He was the one doing all her financial. He was the one that was the financial, and you do need a lawyer to get that one. This does not say who takes over your money. This is merely the proxy. So I think if they're available by cell phone, if they live in another state, but make sure they know what you want, and make sure they know that they're the healthcare proxy. Because that's a surprise to be called up. Hey, we got your grandma in the hospital, and she's designated you. What? Oh, and not to know what they want. So I hope that answered the question. I think it's, but if they're on a mission or they're in the armed services and totally not available, it's a tough one. You figure out somebody that is available, or at least have the backup person available. Next question.
Cami, thank you very much for speaking on this topic. I feel like it's really important. My question is, how do you actually, and does this come to fruition? What are the probabilities that it actually is going to come to fruition? My living will, my post form. I'm sure you must have statistics about that.
So it's kind of dismal because people don't have access to the living will when all these things happen, so they get everything. And often the gentleman who collapses on the golf course at age 96 when they're on the ventilator, and now they have to take him off the ventilator because they didn't know the wishes. And so in reality, if you have not put this in and told people what you want, it will not happen. You will get the default, which is everything. Your family members need to know, your doctor needs to know, and the hospital, but it's a tough situation. And then some people just have to make sure they stand up for their rights and say, I don't want this. Don't do this. But sometimes, as soon as they go unconscious, the oldest child says, nope, now you can put the feeding tube down. But if it's got the pulse form, that's a medical order, that actually gives me, as a physician, power to say, but you know, I know you want your mom to live forever, but you know, they said no, and they actually marked the box that said you can't change it. So the pulse form gives a little bit more power, but not many people have it because, I mean, they're not that near the end of their life yet. So some people want to have that pulse form done even though they're not going to die in the next couple of years. I hope that answered your question.
Question is right here.
Howdy. Similar question, how does one coordinate with EMS and fire department if one is not interested in having their ribs fractured?
Yeah, that's a good question. Coordinating with EMS, the emergency medical system, 911, when they're called, if they don't see the pulse form order, and most of them are educated about it, but it's still a piece of paper. I have my patients, I say, now you got to put this on your refrigerator, and when you collapse, be in front of your refrigerator. So the state of Oregon, the state was the very first state to make an electronic pulse, an e-pulsed. It is available by EMS. They can use a username, password, and on the way, while they're going, they can get access to that in Oregon. Oregon is the leader. New York was the second. They are amazing. They've got an e-mulsed, because it's a different form, and it's electronically available to emergency medical. I am on the committee for the Pulsed Registry Committee to have a registry so we can access that. So if you're down in St. George playing golf, and yet your pulse is up at the Altaview Hospital, How is it going to be accessed? Well, there's a thing called the Utah Health Information Network, and they have what's called the Clinical Health Information Exchange that has it electronically available, these things, but we have not quite got it up and running. We had it running in 2013, and funding ran out. So the grant ran out, and so now we're trying to figure out how we can get it up and running again. Where does this money come from? You know, somebody's got to pay for it. In Oregon, the University of Oregon Health Sciences, they kind of said, we're going to help, we think it's important. In New York, it was like Blue Cross Blue Shield for some reason. They were ones. Other places, it's not well coordinated right now electronically, but I just saw Louisiana got one. Idaho supposedly has an e-MOLST or POLST. So it's baby steps how we get this. California's got some two trials to see how it's best accessed different ways. So we've got a long ways to go, but you know, we didn't have little computers on our sides of our phones, you know, before. You know, I think it's amazing. If you have the actual document in an electronic version that they can see the signature, that might be helpful, but you know, having the piece of paper. So when I fill it out with my patients, I tell them put it on the refrigerator, and I give them 10 copies. I say put it in your glove compartment of your car, give it to every single family member, and especially the two that you've designated to be your proxy, and make sure they know so that if EMS is called, if you're screaming in an agony, EMS's job is to help you. If you don't have a pulse and you're not breathing, that's when there is no CPR. So that's a big difference. In fact, I would rather the DNR, not be DNR, if be AND, allow a natural death, because a natural death doesn't seem as frightening as do not resuscitate, because a lot of doctors think that means do not treat. It doesn't mean do not treat. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks so much for having this very important topic, and keep working on trying to get the 911 connected in there. No one wants to talk about money, but money is a reality at the end of life. That's where most of our money goes, and there needs to be a way. Everybody should let their legislators know that we would like end-of-life options legislation to pass. I've heard from Rebecca Chavez-Hauk that she thinks maybe the best way is with an initiative, and that probably is the best, although they're making that more and more difficult. So, I mean, everyone wants to live a long, healthy, wonderful life, but at some point, for an extra month of living, you could send easily a grandchild to college.
Mm-hmm. Now, that's a good point, and I'm going to mention this. So when my mother had her stroke at 89, this was in September of 2016, and she was driving. She was very independent. She would take her little Pomeranian to the old folks' home and visit the old people who were like in their 70s. So my mother, when she had this small stroke, it affected her balance, and so she had new atrial fibrillation, never happened, and so that's what caused the stroke. We had to transition her from her 3-story duplex, 2-car garage, Pomeranian, into a studio apartment with 1 closet and no Pomeranian. She gave the Pomeranian because she couldn't take care of an animal. Anyway, so the cost of that place was $6,400 a month. I told my mom, we're packing you up to have you go on a cruise ship. You know, this is about the same price as a cruise for a month or two, but it's for a long time. But I've got to pack this huge house. What do you want me to pack? And my mom had the best attitude of all. She said, well, honey, pack my swimsuit. I hear there's a swimming pool next door. And when I said, you know, the car, you can't drive the car anymore. And she said, well, I guess it's my time to be chauffeured. I said, good attitude. So, yes, other question.
Yeah, Cami, thank you so much. Everything you said, I agree. And a lot of what I wanted to say right now, Mark has said. But a question that comes to me, number one, I'm disgusted with the amount of money that's spent in the last few months even of people's lives that goes for insurance. What is your own clinical feeling? and your own personal feeling about having the opportunity to choose to end your life.
So, my personal feeling is I would love to see that option happen. When we put our dog to sleep, how peaceful it was, I said, man, I want that. When it comes, I would like that. But it's not legal in the state of Utah. So I have patients ask me all the time. And I had an uncle who cut me, you're going to send me the drugs, you're going to do it so I can kill myself. And I said, actually, no, because I would be arrested and sent for murder. So I can't. I really can't. I think that it would be a wonderful opportunity, but we do have to regulate it so that people aren't just knocking the old folks out for their inheritance. It is a big deal. So when I'm talking with patients, I usually really want them to understand you've been in the hospital 3 times in the last 3 months, or 6 times in the last 6 months. How is that working for you? I mean, is this something that you want to keep doing, or should we think of a better alternative? And they said, well, I mean, what else is there? And that's when I tell them, it's about your quality. If you want to, you're ill enough, I can say that you have less than 6 months to live. We can arrange hospice. Now, hospice at home is really great for people that have family, and a lot of people. My mother got hospice in her assisted living. We were still paying the $6,400 a month for her room and board. Room and board is not covered on hospice, so that speaks to your question about not only the medical costs of doing surgeries and doing all the treatment. Sometimes it's the best thing to allow them to die of a urinary tract infection or a pneumonia. It sounds cruel not to give antibiotics, but honestly, it's a peaceful way to go. The worst is horrible things that we do in the hospital and torture people, 4 a.m. blood draws. And so I think that we need to really look at what's the quality, what gives life meaning, and help people make that decision so they can choose the option of hospice. And I think with hospice, we can give people a comfortable death and still a good quality. They can be with their family and members, but the ones that don't have that, there is the in-between, which is hospice for the homeless. They have about 8 beds. That's quite not enough, okay? We have people dying all the time, alone, underneath a street. It's sad. They do a count in January every year of all the homeless people, and we have a lot of deaths of people who die. The average age of a homeless person is 50. They don't make it past 50 if they're homeless. They live about as long as you did in 1900. So I don't know if that helps. I kind of wanted to give you a little more information too about that, but yes.
Just a quick comment. I don't know if this will do any good. I carry this little yellow card in my billfold. It says, notice to emergency provider, I, Richard Lane, have an advanced care directive and power of attorney. I'll add those to it. And then it gives the 3 people to contact. It's right there in my billfold opposite my driver's license. Maybe that'll, if I don't collapse in front of my fridge.
Yes, and that is a good thing to have. The conversation project, the one website that I had listed there, they actually have a little card that you can print out and put that information on. The Pulse form, it's nice to actually have the legal form. You can't have it tattooed, DNR. That's not a legal form. You have to actually have the physician's signature and a witnessed and it dated and what your diagnoses are. I mean, the form is pretty lengthy, but it is nice to have that. And some people will have it on their phone, but having who the heck to call and who we can legally talk to is a good idea, and a little card does help.
We have 5 minutes remaining. We have 3 questions. Question here.
I've been told that you can put these documents on the cloud.
Yes.
Is that true?
That's what we're working on for the state of Utah. Here in Utah, we have the Utah Health Information Network, UHIN, and this clinical health information exchange where it can kind of ping different documents in different hospital systems. I mean, every hospital system has electronic medical records. The problem is IHC has Icentra. St. Mark's has Epic. Other hospitals have a totally different system. I mean, they don't talk to each other, and those documents are occupied. But what cloud it's on and how do emergency medical people access it legally with HIPAA protection, because people don't want that personal and private information. It includes your address, your phone number, the last 4 digits of your social security number. That helps to identify you, that PULSE form. So we want it available electronically, but you do want it protected so that it's just not taken off, and because you can get some very interesting things. The PULSE form is to designate the DNR. That's the best way to designate. A living will can say it, but it's not a medical order. So what you want available on the cloud is that medical order, so medical people, the emergency medical, can follow that.
So, just a quick note. Oh, sorry.
Oh.
Yes, following up to the card idea, is there any kind of a medallion or a bracelet you could wear that could point to those, like if I'm my bicycling, my brain's smashed out and don't have any ID, I mean, could those be followed by?
So that's a good point. The medical alert can say that, on it, because it says penicillin allergy or I have a pacemaker or whatever, those types of things. It still is not a legal document. What EMS will do is they will get you transported to the hospital where the doctors can make that decision if it's not the order. So that's just, it's nice to have that. Ideally, if EMS, they're worried about being sued. They've been called. Their job is to do what they've been called to do. And if they are unsure, they are not physicians. They cannot make that decision. And is Lou the last question?
Okay, just a quick comment. There's a new book, my sister's a palliative care physician in Bozeman, called Elderhood, Redefining Aging, Transforming Medicine, and Reimagining Life. She said it's really good. I've never read it.
Elderhood?
Elderhood, yeah.
Yes. And does it have who the author is?
Yeah, it does, but I can't pull it up on my computer.
That's okay, I'll look at it. So, Elderhood. Yeah, Louise Aronson. Elderhood. Redefining Aging, Transforming Medicine, and Reimagining Life. Thank you, Lou. On that note, we were going to be transitioning into Elliott Hall, where we can actually fill out forms, and if you want to have it witnessed, you can actually walk out with a living will. You will not have a PULSE form today. I'm telling you that. I'm not your physician. Some people, I am the physician, but we do that in the doctor's office. I'm not going to do it here. But I hope that is helpful. Anything else?
Let's express appreciation. For anyone here who's mortal, next Sunday is our 5th in our series, Summer Forum Speaker Series, and we're going to have Dr. Tom Hukin and also Elise Lazard speaking on a political subject. Move to amend, getting money out of politics. You may have noticed there is money in politics. And so we'll be here at 10 o'clock next Sunday, the 21st, and let's gather next door in Elliott Hall. Okay? Thank you all very much.